Hi, I'm Mari Ryan. I'm the CEO and founder of Advancing Wellness. Welcome to this expert interview. This is part 2 of my interview with Tom Ciccotti from Shortlister. In the first part of my interview with Tom, we talked about some of the trends that are impacting worksite well-being programs and initiatives. In this video, we'll explore some of the market dynamics that are really driving some of the decisions that employers are making when they're implementing their wellness program and the accompanying technology. I'm sure you'll enjoy this video. So Tom, the research that you're doing is fascinating, and I'm curious if you can take us through a little bit of a deep dive on what are some of the elements that you're seeing as the elements in the market demand. So let's start with maybe what are the must-haves that you're seeing in the research that you conducted?
Yeah, so one of the questions that we pose to our consultant partners is from a product or service standpoint, really a specific program component, if you will. What are the must-haves when an employer moves forward with a particular vendor and selects a solution? They actually go through a selection, they pick a winning vendor, and then they go ahead and they implement that particular solution. 42% of respondents said challenges were the number one must-have component of an offering. Number 2 at 39% were biometric screenings. And number 3 with 25% of respondents were health risk assessments. Rounding out the top 5 were EAPs in 4th, and then health coaching in 5th place.
Interesting. I'm actually fascinated to hear that those are some of the responses. Some places I would have intuitively said might have been declining, like biometrics or HRAs. Mm-hmm. So it's good to know that people are still keen about, collecting data and using that data in a meaningful way to build personalized programs. So that's great.
Yep.
Excellent.
Well, your intuition was correct because as we looked at the top 3 programs that are declining in demand, they were in this order. Number 1, health risk assessments with 46%. Number 2 spot is still held by biometrics at 39%. And then rounding out 3rd is on-site exercise with 31%. And then 4th was health coaching. And then 5th was wearable devices. Now, the confounded look on your face was the same that we had as we started to look at this data.
Help me reconcile that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, we had to do a little bit of digging and circling back with our consultant partners and looking at our data and so forth to really understand how they can be the must-haves but also be declining in demand. And I'll kind of use this analogy as a reference point. It's almost as if the tide has come in on these programs and is now receding. So they're still very prevalent. If you think of the buyer of a solution, if I'm an HR purchaser and financial wellness is an exciting topic, mental well-being, these mindfulness, these resilience apps, and all of these different tools are very exciting and new offerings. I've never purchased that before. I don't have a reference point for, well, what questions should I be asking? What should a user experience look like? What is the appropriate market price for these different services? But when you think traditional wellness, you think these core items that the HR buyer has likely had at his or her prior employer or has purchased in the past, biometric screenings and understanding the relative cost of a venipuncture draw or a finger stick, a health risk assessment. And I know I want some branch logic and I want to be able to customize my questions and so forth. These are very familiar elements. So there's still the comfort level, though the more holistic focus as we showcased in the first session was absolutely growing with today's HR buyer and these employers. But as I'm making decisions now, it's inherently how anyone buys anything. If I own a car and I'm going to go buy a motorcycle, I don't maybe know all the questions to ask. So I'm going to do a little bit more discovery. I might be window shopping and so forth, but I don't know all of the questions that I should or what the appropriate price points are for that. So you see folks sticking with what they know from a purchasing perspective.
That makes sense. That's great. That's a great explanation. Thank you. I'm curious as to whether there are other things that you are seeing that are growing in demand.
Yeah. So when we then ask the question of, from a product or service standpoint, what are you seeing your employer clients ask about most? Far and away in first place with 73% of respondents was financial wellness, unsurprisingly. We are seeing that be a little bit more generic requests. There isn't as much knowledge of the nuance to, is it student loan repayment? Is it financial education? Is it money management? Is it a number of different things? The number 2 response was mental well-being with 50% of the respondents. Again, a little bit of an area where there's a blurred line between asking for what we would consider to be a mental well-being program, something focused on mindfulness, resilience, and something that would fall under the category of behavioral health, where we're going to be looking at, something like depression, a clinically diagnosed psychological condition in which we're looking for very specific interventions there. So line kind of blurs there, but they're falling into that larger bucket where 50% of respondents said that's a growing area of interest for our employer clients. And then finally, with 25% of respondents was clinics. It's kind of a combination of both on-site, near-site. Kind of goes to the theme from our first session about mobile first, just improving access and potentially even personalization for their member, establishing that relationship with some type of medical service, primary care physician in this instance, and so forth. Rounding out top 5 then, we had diabetes, both management and prevention solutions, pretty even split between those 2, and then telemedicine as the 5th option growing in demand. And you'd normally maybe expect that to be a little bit higher, I think, at the rate that telehealth solutions are embedded into a lot of carrier-based options at a nominal or no cost in some cases. Access to that in some capacity likely exists for most employers.
Fascinating. Well, that's great to hear about how some of the trends that we're seeing around things like telemedicine are starting to work their way into the areas for growing demand. Excellent. So I'm curious about one of the elements that your report has revealed is some aspects of what you're calling point solutions. And I'm wondering if you can go into these point solutions a little bit and explain, what your research is revealing there.
Yeah. So, when we see an interest in point solutions, period, it's really the desire for either the provider we currently have in place has a fairly basic offering in a particular area. We need something with a little bit more depth and substance, or they're deficient in that area in particular. I really want some resource or organization that is specialized in this area. Financial wellness, mental well-being, and so forth would be excellent examples of that, where I want a dedicated resource that is best in class at that particular aspect, and I want to plug that into my broader offering. We talked about the agnostic hub models being perfect for that, because I can activate these different areas if and when I'm ready to turn on or release a financial wellness solution. It saves them some of the time, of course, to have those agnostic hub partners of maybe having to go out for a second RFP and vet and validate the market. They know that the integration from an API or data exchange perspective between that partner exists with their base platform. The reporting that we talked about in the first version of this series, but then finally, sometimes there's consolidated billing that comes from that. So we understand the interest in the point solutions for all the reasons I just described. We asked, what do you expect to get the most traction, specifically from a product and service standpoint, that is a point solution in 2018? And mental well-being programs, stress, resilience, mindfulness, took the number 1 spot at 54% of respondents. Number 2, with 42%, were diabetes, either prevention or management-focused programming, really targeting a fairly substantial portion of some populations and high-cost individuals with the management of or the maintenance of a particular condition can yield much higher quality of life for them, of course, but also cost savings for both they and the employer. Third was sleep at 19%, which is going to be interesting. There are fewer providers in the market offering sleep solutions, beyond CPAP machines and things like that. So there's certainly interest. I don't know if there's many providers in the market to fill that void, which will be interesting. And then we did what are the next 5? So different than from the previous slides where we, what were the total 5. Next was financial wellness, then tobacco cessation programming, followed by weight management programming, broader disease management, and then a focus on nutrition. So that's kind of the top 8 growing point solutions in demand that was expected for 18. And we're seeing a lot of our data objectively through the platform as our user base is going out to market and making selections. reflect this with a high degree of accuracy.
Excellent. Wow, it's really interesting to see the direction that some of this is going, and certainly in larger populations where things like, behavioral health, mental health costs, or diabetes costs can be really high, even though there may be a small percentage of the population that has those conditions, they can be very costly. So it's interesting to see how the point solutions are rounding out. So that's fabulous information.
Mm-hmm.
I have another question about, whether there are any products or services that the HR community is focusing on with regard to how they're, spending their budget, or really, what their priorities are, and how that attention might be distracting them from focus on well-being of the workforce.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the things we've come to find over the years, and you and I have known each other from our start as the Wellness Research Institute, now Shortlister, part of our rebrand and being a little bit more agnostic in the areas of the market that we track, is this realization that today's HR buyer has a finite amount of time, hours in the day, and budget for the programming that they bring forward to their population, in an effort to be more efficient operationally, to be more compliant, and so forth. Sometimes those dollars that may be earmarked for wellness or condition management or diabetes management or any of these other programs in a given year, they start to look at other HR technologies to say, how do we improve our efficiency as an organization, right? So the number one thing, what we asked was, what products or services is the HR buyer most commonly focusing their attention on when they aren't looking at wellness? Number one response was HRIS systems with 28% of respondents. Then admin platforms from 23% of respondents. Recruitment solutions for 10%, really just let's get the best talent into our organization. Rounding out the next 5 were payroll. Bringing automation to all of these different processes, everything I've stated previously, as well as payroll. Learning and development tools and resources. More of a focus on rewards and recognition for the population, and tying this all together. The point solutions came back up, and then finally rounding it out was employee assistance program, CAP.
Okay. Well, that's interesting because it's consistent with what I hear from my clients in terms of the way they are prioritizing. They've got so many things on their plate and they're prioritizing the work that they're doing. So that's great to hear how it's also broadening your scope in terms of the work that you're looking at. Fabulous.
Yeah.
So Tom, if our audience wants to learn more about Shortlister and the work you're doing, or to obtain a copy of your research report, where can they reach you and find you?
Yeah, I'd welcome them to go to www.myshortlister.com, find all of our information, the full report that we've gone over here there. You can also feel free to email me directly at tciccotti@myshortlister.com.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate all your insights, this great work that you and your team are doing at Shortlister, and grateful for your time, Tom.
Thank you for having me, Mari. I appreciate it.
All right.